Kampala, Uganda, February 16, 1977. The courtyard of the Nile mansions fills before dawn. Soldiers have been arriving since midnight. By morning, several thousand of them are assembled in the red dust under a sky still bruised with darkness. They have been told to expect a public confession, a humiliation, the kind that ends careers and sometimes lives. A man in white robes is brought forward. He is the Archbishop of the Church of Uganda. He has been awake since soldiers pulled him from his home the previous night. He has not slept. He has had no water. He stands in front of Field Marshal Idi Amin Dada, President for life of the Republic of Uganda, in front of the assembled troops, in front of the diplomatic corps, summoned to witness whatever comes next. Amin reads from a prepared list of accusations: smuggling weapons, fomenting rebellion, acting as a tool of foreign powers seeking to destabilize the country. The Archbishop listens without moving. When Amin is done, the man in white speaks. He denies everything, clearly, without trembling. He tells the truth in a courtyard where telling the truth is a sentence. He is not a man who came to politics. He is a man who came to Christ. But he had discovered in the years before this morning that in Uganda in 1977, those two paths had collapsed into one. His name is Janani Luwum. He is 55 years old. He will be dead within 24 hours. How does a man stand in that courtyard and say what he knows to be true when the government surrounding him has already decided what he will say? Comment below with, "I will not be silent." If you want to understand what forms a soul that does not defer to fear, what practices, what choices, what years of ordinary faithfulness built the man who stood in that courtyard, stay to the very end. We will walk through it all. January 1st, 1922, Acholi country, northern Uganda. A region of red laterite roads and wide sky where the rains arrive in long gray curtains and farmers wake before light. Janani is born into a family of subsistence farmers. There is no church nearby, no school within easy reach, no particular reason by any measure the wider world uses to expect anything extraordinary from this child in this place. He is a boy who listens. He has a habit, from very young, of staying with the elders long after other children have wandered off. He sits with old people and hears their whole stories. His grandmother tells him once that God does not forget a single sparrow. He tucks this away without quite knowing what to do with it. He reaches 17. He begins teaching at a local primary school, not because he holds a qualification, but because he can read, and there is almost no one else who can. His students are barely younger than he is. He teaches the same lessons in the morning that he is still working through himself in the evening. It is his first experience of ministry, though he would not have called it that yet. On an evening in 1948, something happens that he will spend the rest of his life attempting to describe accurately and always feel he has fallen short. He is walking back from a village gathering when a sense of presence comes over him that he will later call a meeting with the living Christ. He does not fall. He does not speak in tongues. He simply stops on a path in northern Uganda and understands something he has never understood before: that God is not an idea inherited from missionaries passing through, that God is a person, and that this person has been looking for him. He stands on that path for a long time. The next morning he gives away everything he owns, his good clothes, his small savings. He tells his family what happened. They are uncertain what to make of him. He is not uncertain. He is received into the Anglican Church. He studies. He is ordained deacon, then priest. He spends years walking between communities in northern Uganda that can only be reached on foot, carrying the Eucharist in a bag, holding services under open sky when buildings do not exist, preaching in Acholi and then in Luganda, and then in English, and then in whatever language each new community requires of him. He is not building a career. He is learning the interior of the work. By 1964, he is at the London College of Divinity, taking careful notes. He observes how a church operates when it has institutional comfort and what it quietly sacrifices to maintain it. He comes home with a degree and a settled conviction that the church he is returning to must be stronger from the inside than it appears from the outside. He rises through the structures of the Church of Uganda, Bishop of Northern Uganda. Then, in 1974, Archbishop, the second Ugandan to hold the office. He moves his family to Kampala. His wife, Mary Labol, plants a garden. Their children settle into school. It is, for a brief window, the ordinary life of a man who has worked hard and arrived somewhere. But what is happening in Uganda in 1974 is not ordinary. Idi Amin has been in power since 1971. The coup that brought him to the presidency was welcomed by some because the man he replaced had himself become brutal. That welcome lasted roughly 2 years. By 1973, the State Research Bureau, the secret police, is conducting disappearances in patterns too consistent to be coincidental. By 1974, the count of the dead already runs to thousands. The bodies surface in the Nile. They are found in forests outside the capital. Sometimes they are not found at all. Estimates will eventually reach 300,000. The Church of Uganda is in a position with no good exits. It operates schools, hospitals, and networks of community care that hundreds of thousands of people depend on. Every sermon is monitored. Clergy have already been taken. Ministers who have said too much have already gone quiet in the permanent way. The bishops gather in private, and the conclusion they keep arriving at is the same one. Speak and lose everything you have built. Stay silent and lose something harder to name. Janani Luwum does not arrive at his decision in a single moment. This matters. He does not wake up one morning in February 1977 and choose to be brave. He has been choosing quietly. For 3 years he has been asking in private prayer the question he will eventually be forced to answer in public. What does faithfulness cost here? What does silence cost there? At what point does a shepherd who refuses to name the wolf become complicit in what happens to the sheep? He begins where he can without speaking directly. He uses the church's medical network to shelter families of the disappeared. He coordinates with international church bodies to document what is occurring. He writes careful letters to Amin's government that are formal in language and devastating in content, and which receive no response. He meets with foreign ambassadors. He meets with Amin himself more than once privately and tells him plainly what the church has witnessed. Amin listens. Amin smiles. The killings continue. In January 1977, the homes of 2 cabinet ministers, both Christian, are raided by the State Research Bureau. Weapons are supposedly found. Both men are arrested. Janani knows these men. He knows the raid is fabricated. He knows what usually comes next for people the State Research Bureau has decided to be finished with. He calls all the bishops to Kampala. He tells them what he has seen and what he believes is coming. He tells them that silence from the church at this moment is not neutrality. It is permission. He tells them he intends to write a letter to Amin, signed by all of them, documenting the abuses and requesting accountability. He tells them he understands if any of them cannot sign it. Every bishop in the room signs the letter. He hand-delivers it to the State House on February 5, 1977. He makes sure they understand it comes from him personally. The letter is very polite. It is also the most dangerous document in Uganda that month. In careful and documented language, it states that the government of Uganda is killing its own citizens. It states that the church cannot continue to hold silence. It asks for investigation and accountability. It is signed by every bishop of the Church of Uganda. Janani Luwum's name leads them all. Amin's response comes 11 days later, not in writing. On the night of February 15th, soldiers arrive at the Archbishop's compound. They search the house thoroughly. They claim to find weapons hidden on the property. Mary Lebol is present while they pull apart her home. She watches them handle what they claim to have found. Janani moves through the night of the search in a way she will later describe as something beyond ordinary calm. Not the suppression of fear, but the presence of something that does not leave room for it. He is told to report to the Nile mansions in the morning. He spends what remains of the night in prayer. He calls his children to him. He tells them he loves them. He says something to Mary Lebol that she will keep to herself for years afterward. He tells her plainly that he does not believe he is coming back, that he has made peace with this, that the God who found him on a path in Acholi country in 1948 has not left him and will not leave him, and that she is not to be afraid. She is afraid. She prays with him anyway. In the morning, he goes. At the Nile mansions, the other bishops who have been summoned are given a clear opportunity to distance themselves from the letter. The pressure in that room is not metaphorical. It is physical. Amin's generals are present. Several of the bishops revise their names away from what they signed. The Archbishop watches this happen. He does not revise his name. He does not apologize for the letter. He says again to the room that everything it contains is true. He is held there as the others are released. At some point during that day, he is moved to a location that appears in no official record. He is with the two cabinet ministers whose arrest precipitated all of this. The three of them are together. On February 17, 1977, the government of Uganda announces that Janani Luwum and the two ministers died in a car accident while attempting to overpower their driver and escape. The bodies are returned to their home regions for burial. Janani Luwum's body is sent to Acholi country, to the same red roads he grew up walking, with orders that there is to be no public funeral. The Church of Uganda holds a memorial service at Canterbury Cathedral anyway. Several thousand people come. The building cannot hold them. They stand outside in the heat and listen to the service through the open doors. Among them are people who have lost brothers and sisters and children to the same apparatus that killed their archbishop. There is grief in that crowd, but there is something else the government, which was watching, had not calculated for. The crowd does not scatter. The crowd does not go quiet. The crowd sings. Before we follow what came next, a brief word. These stories take real research, primary sources, correspondence, the written testimony of survivors. If you want to be part of the community that makes this work possible, the Join button on the channel homepage or the membership link in the description will take you there. You will not simply be supporting a production. You will be standing alongside a tradition of witnesses who believed these things should not be forgotten. Janani Luwum is gone, but what he did does not behave the way the government expected it to. Atrocities that have been named have a different half-life than atrocities that remain hidden. The letter the bishops signed had already moved outside Uganda through the International Church Network. Luwum had spent years cultivating. The Anglican Communion knew. The United Nations knew. The international press knew. The documentation existed before the soldiers arrived at his door. Within weeks, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, one of the few African leaders willing to speak publicly against Amin, names the regime. Tanzania invades Uganda in 1978. By 1979, Amin has fled from the country. He lives out his remaining years in Saudi Arabia, dying in exile in 2003, never prosecuted. The 300,000 dead of his regime remain without a formal accounting. Janani Luwum is buried in Acholi country. His grave is plain. Later it will be properly marked, but in 1977 it is simply a mound of red earth in the region where he was born. In Canterbury Cathedral, above the Great West Door, there are 10 niches that stood empty for centuries. In 1998, the Church of England filled them with 10 statues of 20th century Christian martyrs. Janani Luwum stands among them in stone, beside Maximilian Kolbe, beside Dietrich Bonhoeffer, beside Oscar Romero, above the entrance to the oldest Anglican cathedral in the world. They are all there because they spoke, when silence was available and cheaper. They are all there because someone decided this should not be forgotten. His feast day in the Anglican calendar is February 17th every year. It does not move. What formed the man who could stand in that courtyard and speak? What practices, built over decades of ordinary pastoral life, made Janani Luwum the kind of person who did not bend? The first is attentive prayer. From the earliest years of his ministry, Luwum was known for sitting with people long past the point where a busy man would have found a reason to leave. He sat with old women. He sat with farmers between planting seasons. He sat with the dying and let them take as long as they needed. He described this practice as prayer made visible, because you cannot attend to a person with that kind of sustained focus without beginning to understand what God sees when looking at them. That habit of attention, repeated across 30 years of pastoral work, made it impossible for him to process the names of the disappeared as statistics. He had sat with too many people. The dead had faces he had looked at. When the church fell silent in the face of what was happening, the silence was not a policy position to him. It was a decision to look away from particular faces. He was incapable of that decision. He had prayed himself out of the capacity to make it. The second is the community of witness. He did not write the letter alone. He called the bishops together. He told them what he saw and what he believed it required. He laid out his intention and invited them to stand with him. He did not manufacture agreement or apply pressure. He let them decide. Every bishop signed. Some would later withdraw their names under the pressure in the room at the Nile Mansions. And this is worth sitting with honestly, not as condemnation but as accurate record. The pressure was real. People break under real pressure. What matters is that the original act of witness was communal, built on relationships of trust that had been established across years of ordinary ministry long before they were tested. Luwum had built that network not for a crisis but for the work. When the crisis arrived, the network was there. A leader who has not built those relationships cannot call on them when they are needed. The trust that made the letter possible was assembled slowly, one ordinary pastoral visit at a time, across a decade of work that had nothing overtly dramatic about it. The third is the refusal to divide faith from its consequences in the world. Luwum never accepted the argument that a church administering hospitals and schools and burying the dead and baptizing children could hold a position of political neutrality. He rejected it not as a political judgment, but as a pastoral one. He used a phrase his colleagues recalled afterward: "The church does not get to bury the dead and refuse to ask who killed them." For him, the spiritual and the material were not two separate spheres requiring separate vocabularies. They were the same problem seen from different angles. His faith required him to speak. He had not arrived at that requirement suddenly in February 1977. He had been working through it for years, in private, in prayer, in the small decisions he made before anyone was watching. By the time the morning of February 16th arrived, silence was not a live option. It had been foreclosed long before. He had quietly closed that door himself, year by year, in the ordinary rooms of his ordinary work. The fourth is joy. This is the hardest to describe and, once you have looked at the accounts carefully, the hardest to explain away. Mary Labol described the night of the search. Soldiers dismantling her home, lifting things and setting them down, the whole terrible theater of it, and said that her husband moved through that night as if he were already somewhere the soldiers could not follow him into. Bishop Festo Kivangere, who fled Uganda in the week after Luwum's death and wrote his own account of those final days, said that the Archbishop's presence in his last hours was not what a frightened man looks like when he is suppressing it. It was something warmer and stranger. Luwum had prayed in solitude long enough to have found what is available at the bottom of prayer when everything else is stripped away. The discovery that God is present in the worst possible room, and that this presence is not cancelled by the worst possible outcome. Joy is not happiness. Joy is not the feeling that things are going well. It is the settled recognition that the one thing that cannot be taken is already yours, and has been all along. This cannot be searched for or planted as false evidence or undone by a government statement about a car accident. It is available to anyone who has access to the same God. But it is not found quickly. It requires time in ordinary rooms, ordinary prayer. The long practice of paying attention to the presence that does not leave. The time to begin is not when the soldiers arrive, it is now. Janani Luwum was born on red roads in northern Uganda with no particular advantage. He had no powerful family behind him, no foreign backing, no institutional protection beyond what he built himself. He had a conversion on a path in Acholi country in 1948, and he spent the next 29 years building the interior life that made him who he was on February 16, 1977. When they brought him to the courtyard, the work had already been done. There was nothing left to remove. The letter the bishops wrote asked Amin to investigate. He did not investigate, but the letter also did something that Amin could not prevent. It named what was happening. In a country where naming had been made dangerous, a community of church leaders named it anyway, at personal cost, and signed their names. The naming outlasted the government. The letter, the names of the signatories, the name of the man who hand-delivered it, they are still available. They are still being read. Comment below with, "I will not be silent." If this story has moved you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This channel exists to keep faith with the witnesses. The people who paid what faithfulness costs and left behind something that cannot be buried with them. This week, Find the one place in your own life where you know what is true and have been finding reasons not to say it. Not a courtyard, not a crisis, just an ordinary room with an ordinary conversation that needs to happen. Start there. Janani Luwum did not find what he needed on February 16th. He had been building it since 1948. Our next witness is Mehdi Dibaj, the Iranian pastor who sat on death row for 9 years, wrote his own discs from a prison cell without a lawyer, and turned down the one offer that would have freed him, because accepting it required a single word he had decided, long ago, he would not say.